You arrive at a point in your life where noise becomes useless, where reaction becomes a form of surrender, and where silence begins to feel less like weakness and more like a weapon sharpened in the dark. You do not choose this evolution, life forces it upon you. Every betrayal chisels you. Every manipulation refines you. Every disappointment strips away the illusions you once clung to. Eventually, you see the truth with the cold clarity of a blade held up to the light. Toxic people do not thrive on your kindness. They thrive on your response. They survive by pulling emotion out of you like extracting blood from a wound. They feed on your explanations, your apologies, your attempts to fix what was never yours to repair. And when you finally stop performing, when you retreat into the discipline of silence, something shifts in the air. Their control dissolves. Their theatrics lose their audience. Their chaos collapses without your participation. You watch it happen with the calmness of a strategist who has finally refused to play the game he once felt obligated to win. Silence, you learn, is not emptiness. It is structure. It is intention. It is presence without permission. It is the moment you reclaim the leverage they assumed you would never take back. And as they spiral, as they shout into the void, as they attempt to provoke you into resurrecting the old pattern, you remain still, not as a doormat but as a fortress. Because power is not loud. Power is the refusal to react on command. From this vantage point, you begin to see how often people mistake access for ownership. They think proximity entitles them to your energy. They assume history grants them the right to your loyalty. They believe your compassion is an infinite resource they may drain without consequence. But a mind sharpened by suffering becomes intolerant of these assumptions. A heart rebuilt after collapse becomes selective in its permissions. And a soul that has learned to master its own silence no longer bends to the emotional economies of the unworthy. This is when you begin crafting the sentences that rewire your entire existence. The short, precise truths that feel like iron laws carved into stone. You start with the simplest one. You do not exist to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The world romanticizes self-sacrifice, but that romance turns to ashes in your lungs when you realize you've been burning for people who stand there with cold hands and colder intentions. You begin to examine your own patterns, the places where your generosity became a wound, where your empathy became a burden, where your patience became a cage. And slowly you change the script. You learn to say no without justification. You learn to say I'm not available without apology. You learn to say you've changed without flinching because change is the only proof you were ever truly alive. You learn to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you, people who twist your words into weapons, people who demand access to your heart while offering nothing but damage in return. And as these truths crystallize, something new is born inside you, the ruthless clarity required to protect your peace. Not a fragile, passive peace but a fortified one. A peace guarded by boundaries that no longer waver. A peace you build brick by brick through discipline, distance, and the refusal to surrender your mental territory. This is not selfishness. It is sovereignty. And sovereignty requires strategy. So you begin to read people not through their promises but through their patterns. You see how emotional addicts operate, the reward and punishment cycles, the guilt traps, the theatrics designed to pull you back into the story where you are the savior and they are the victim. You see the way they rely on your softness to cushion their recklessness. You see how they interpret your silence as fear, your distance as confusion, your restraint as defeat. They imagine you quiet because you are calculating a reply, not realizing you are calculating an exit. That is the turning point, the moment you understand toxic attachment is not love. It is chemical dependency. It is the brain confusing instability with intensity, confusing chaos with connection, confusing exhaustion with devotion. And the moment you recognize this, the illusion dies. You remember every night you couldn't sleep, every conversation you rehearsed, every apology you crafted in advance for sins you didn't commit. You remember the feeling of shrinking, the feeling of walking on eggshells, The feeling of giving everything and receiving the bare minimum clothed in counterfeit affection. And then you remember the whisper, the one you try to ignore. This isn't right. The whisper becomes a warning. The warning becomes a breaking point. And the breaking point becomes your liberation. You finally understand you weren't waiting for them to change, you were waiting for yourself to wake up. It is at this threshold that the mind begins rebuilding itself. It sheds the fantasy that love must hurt. It rejects the notion that endurance is noble. It discards the belief that loyalty means self-erasure. It replaces them with something sharper, something truer. You are not obligated to suffer for anyone's comfort. And once that truth becomes instinct, you begin writing new laws for your life. Laws that redefine your emotional landscape. Laws that cut through manipulation like a clean blade. Laws that ensure you will never again be reduced to the version of yourself who begged for clarity from people committed to confusion. You learn that anyone angered by your boundaries was benefiting from your lack of them. You learn that loyalty without limits transforms you from a partner into a servant. You learn that you are responsible for your healing but not for the healing of those who refuse to face their own wounds. You learn that arguing for your value is the first sign you are surrounded by the wrong people. You learn that silence, they protect your future from the erosion your past once tolerated. And as these principles settle into your bones, you realize the person you used to be, the one who tolerated too much, who explained too much, who excused too much, is gone. Not temporarily. Permanently. You have crossed a threshold you can no longer uncross. You have seen the pattern. You have named the game. You have reclaimed the power you once scattered in every direction. And in doing so, you have become unreachable to the version of people who once fed on your hesitation. You do not hate them. You do not wish them harm. You simply understand what they always feared you would. That the moment you stop participating is the moment their illusion collapses. And that collapse is not your responsibility. It is their reckoning. You no longer break yourself to hold the relationship together. You no longer argue with fire. You smother it by walking away. You do not announce your awakening. You enact it. Quietly. Strategically. Completely. And as your silence closes the door they once assumed would always remain open, you discover a truth Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The most powerful sentence is not, "I'm done," but the silence that follows when your departure is already final. Toxic people live off control. Silence removes control. They cannot provoke you, guilt you, or force you to react on command, and that terrifies them more than any insult ever could. Silence is not absence. It is the revenge of the emotionally disciplined. It is presence without availability. You remain still powerful, still whole, but unreachable. Let them shout. Let them spiral. Let them choke on the silence they once used to wound you. Because now that silence has been weaponized. And when you speak again, if ever you do, it will not be to plead. It will be to declare on your own time, on your own terms. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of control. A single, precise sentence can shatter years of psychological conditioning, awaken dormant clarity, and end cycles that once seemed eternal. In the world of toxic dynamics, one sharp, intentional phrase can pull you out of the trance of self-sacrifice and set you free. These truths must be burned into your nervous system. They are not affirmations. They are battle commands. Repeat them. Memorize them. Etch them into your mental armor. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Read that again. You are not required to burn through your emotional, physical, and mental reserves to keep someone else comfortable in their dysfunction. Self-destruction is not nobility, it is submission. No is a complete sentence. No soft landing, no sugarcoating, no nervous laughter, no qualifying addendum, just no. If someone cannot respect your no, they were never negotiating in good faith. "I am not available for that," is a more potent weapon than the longest explanation. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I wish I could." Just a clean, resolute, unambiguous declaration. I am not available. You are not available for drama. You are not available for manipulation. You are not available for disrespect. Your time is finite. Your peace is expensive. Your energy is not a public utility to be rationed at the whim of someone else's emotional volatility. The old you tolerated what the new you refuses to entertain. Let them whisper, let them accuse, let them label you cold, selfish, unfeeling. That is the mask falling away, the game ending, the pattern collapsing. You do not explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop speaking to deaf ears, to people who weaponize your words, who twist meaning into leverage. You do not need their understanding, you need your own self-respect. Peace is not passive. It is deliberate, constructed, fortified. It does not happen by accident. You must build it, guard it, enforce it. That may mean walking away from people who claim to love you but only love the version of you that existed for their convenience. It may mean becoming the villain in the story of someone who only valued you when you did not value yourself. Silence is not surrender. It is strategy. When they mistake your calm for fear or weakness, you do not correct them. You know the playbook. You have seen every tactic, every script, every subtle weapon they wielded against you. And now none of it moves you. You can love someone and still leave. You can care, you can wish them well and still choose never to speak to them again. Love does not require absorption, sacrifice, or submission. You can release without bitterness, without performance, without explanation. These phrases are not mere words. They are psychological shields, carved from the hard truth of experience, sharpened by clarity. Memorize them. Repeat them. Speak them without tremor when the time demands. A single sentence delivered with complete certainty can sever 1,000 invisible chains. Toxic dynamics train you into loops. You rehearse conversations that never go as planned. You walk on eggshells, shrinking yourself to avoid conflict, giving more than you intended, and still it is never enough. Your body signals collapse, your nervous system trembles beneath the weight of what you tolerate. Yet instead of leaving, many double down. They blame themselves. They convince themselves the chaos is normal, the dysfunction survivable, the abuse justified. They whisper, if I explain better this time, maybe they'll understand. If I am more patient, perhaps they'll finally see what they are doing. If I love harder, they will change. But the truth is they will not, because change is never demanded from those who never recognize their role in perpetuating harm. Toxic attachment is not love. It is chemical addiction to the highs and lows, a dependence on chaos disguised as intimacy. People remain not because of affection but because comfort has been replaced by dependency, because the rare moments of peace are rewards too sparse to outweigh the constant erosion of self. Tension masquerades as passion, drama as intimacy, control as care. Recognizing this is the first step toward liberation. It is painful, terrifying, and disorienting because it requires dismantling fantasies you have long nurtured. The fantasies that loyalty alone can awaken change. That love alone can create evolution. That perseverance alone can manufacture understanding. That is not love. That is captivity. You are not failing when you walk away. You are not cruel when you enforce peace. You are not selfish when you protect yourself. What is cruel is remaining, slowly sacrificing yourself for someone who never needed saving, and for whom no amount of sacrifice could have been enough. Your breakdown, your exhaustion, your emptiness, these are not weaknesses. They are wake-up calls, signals from a body and mind long overdue for preservation. And all it takes is one permission. Permission to protect your energy, to refuse access to people who would consume it without reciprocation, to outgrow the version of you that accepted less than what you deserve. This is the death of illusion. The point where you stop hoping they will be the person they pretended to be, and start seeing them as they are. Painful? Yes. Messy? Absolutely. Necessary? Indisputably. From this collapse arises your sovereignty. Only after the illusion dies can you build a structure of boundaries, clarity, and untouchable peace. Toxic people are not complicated. They are predictable, mechanical, operating off patterns, triggers, and your weaknesses. They do not win because they are smarter, but because you have been playing by emotional rules while they play by power. It is time to rewrite the rulebook. And that rulebook must be absolute, non-negotiable, immovable. Law 1. Those who resent your boundaries were benefiting from their absence. They are upset not because you are cruel but because the game has changed. Law 2. Loyalty without limits is servitude, not love. Respect does not require martyrdom. Law 3. You are not responsible for someone else's healing. Support does not equate to carrying the weight of another's dysfunction. Law 4. If you must argue for your worth, you are already surrounded by the wrong people. Value is felt, not begged for. Law 5. Silence is not absence but calculated control. It is how the wise smother fire rather than feed it. Law 6. Guilt is the leash they wield to tether you, break it or remain owned. Law 7. Closure is self-administered. It is a verdict, not a shared conversation. Law 8. Time and access are privileges, not entitlements. Presence must be earned and can be revoked without negotiation. Law 9. Emotional discipline is power. Calm observation dominates the room where reaction fuels chaos. Law 10. You are no longer the person who tolerated the intolerable. You have seen the pattern, named the game, and refused to flinch. These laws are not cruelty, they are survival strategies. Fast forward 10 years. Are you still shrinking yourself, negotiating with chaos, sacrificing for people who never valued you, apologizing for breathing too loudly, explaining yourself endlessly to deaf ears? Or have you rebuilt a life around sovereignty, boundaries, and self-respect? The first is a legacy of exhaustion, silence, and unnoticed sacrifice. The second is the legacy of strategy, clarity, and inviolable peace. You do not reconcile with those who thrived on your weakness. You do not explain, justify, or perform. You disappear. The most powerful sentence in your arsenal is not, "I'm done." It is the silence that follows. Absolute, untouchable, irreversible. When you vanish in this way, the chaos you once endured collapses under its own weight, and the manipulators discover that absence is the most potent weapon of all. They will attempt to bait you. They will accuse, plead, rage, or feign confusion. They will attempt to reinsert themselves into your orbit. But your orbit has expanded. You no longer dance to their rhythm, no longer feed their cycle, no longer perform to sustain their illusions. You are unreachable, untouchable, invisible in your command of your own mind. This is not coldness, it is clarity. Not cruelty but sovereignty. Not hate but discernment. Not revenge but strategy. And in the stillness that follows, in the quiet mastery of your own energy, you realize that this is not merely an exit. It is a recalibration of power, a declaration that your peace is no longer negotiable, that your value is not for debate, that your time, energy, and presence are yours alone to allocate. And with this recalibration you see clearly, you do not need to hate them. You do not need to curse them. You do not need to make them miss you. You simply need to refuse to be accessed again, to refuse to hand them any part of yourself they will exploit. No second chances. No reopening wounds. No dialogue required. You are rescuing yourself. The most potent act of power is the silent act, the withdrawal executed with precision and certainty, which leaves the manipulator staring at absence and realizing that the game is over, that their leverage is gone, that the version of you they once controlled no longer exists, and that you are now sovereign, untouchable, and free. This is the ultimate inversion. Where once your empathy was ammunition, your detachment becomes the weapon. Where once your loyalty was a trap, your absence becomes an unbreachable fortress. Where once your attempts to explain were exploited, your silence is a blade, precise, clean, and final. You leave quietly, coldly, and completely, not for vengeance, not to teach a lesson, not to manipulate, not to signal awakening, but because the role they wrote for you has expired, because the pattern they thrived upon has been exposed, because your future requires it. You do not vanish with fury, you vanish with certainty. Power is not loud. It does not announce itself. Power exits the room and never returns. And the world, and everyone who once sought to dominate you through chaos, finally understands what they always feared. You are no longer theirs to manipulate, no longer theirs to exhaust, no longer theirs to define. You are a sovereign of your own mind. And that is invincibility.